Hey everyone, it's Mrs. Slauson and welcome. We are on page 60 in our pink note packet, and I gotta do a little adjusting here. And we are going to start taking a look at graphing. And one thing, sorry, I'm gonna adjust the screens as well, that I want you to think about is when we were factoring to solve and that an answer showed up more than once and I asked you to write that down every time, that is what's going to happen here. Because that's going to determine when we graph and we look at our x-axis and we start to graph this shape, this bumpy line or bumpy U, will that shape cross the x-axis? Okay, will it bounce off the x-axis or will it wiggle? So it's still going to cross, but it's going to kind of do like a little wiggle as it goes through the x-axis. All right. So first thing I've done is I've already gone to Desmos and I've put this in my graphing in this Desmos thing. It does want you to, and I would suggest you do this, go to that little wrench on the right and put this for x min and x max. And for your y, there wasn't a suggestion. I went from -300 to 50. So let me switch screens and show you what I'm talking about. So when I hit this little wrench, I went from -6 to 2 like they suggested. And then for my y-axis, I went from -300 to 50. Because I want to be able to see the whole graph. I want to be able to see, is it a bumpy line or a bumpy U? And I also want to see where it turns. All right, so this is what the shape looks like. I'm going to quickly draw that shape on my graph paper, and I would suggest you do that as well. And I'm going to do that. So I'm going to pause the video while I take care of that, and you can do that too. All right, so what I want you to notice first is, and I'm going to keep this up on Desmos right now, is that this overall shape is a bumpy U. And I realize that that's a little hard to tell because we can't, at this exact moment, see what the highest exponent is, but I will show you how we do that. Otherwise, what I want you to see is, as it goes right here, this is what I mean by the wiggle. All right, it's crossing it, but it's kind of going on a little wiggle, and we call it bounce, wiggle, cross. So it kind of goes through, but at a curve, and then it crosses cleanly through here, and when it gets to this, it bounces off the x-axis. And again, that's really important. All right, so if I were to solve this problem, I'm going to switch back to the notes. The nice thing about this one is this is actually already in factored form. So I'm only going to really do this once, but if we look at what this problem is really looking like, there's actually 3 of these x plus 4s. There's 1 of the x plus 2s, and there's 2 of the x minus 1s. And so if I were to start solving, I want to go to the factors. I just want to go to the factors that have an x in it. This -2 is a factor, but I wouldn't solve for it because it's just -2. There's not an x in there. And when I go to these x plus 4s, all 3 of them, I get -4 showing up 3 times. And what I want you to focus on is that it shows up an odd amount of times. All right? When I get to x plus 2, it just shows up once. And when I get to x minus 1 and my answer is 1, it shows up an even amount of times. So what you need to focus on is how many times does your graph or does your solution show up. If it shows up once, then what's going to happen is that's the clean cross. So up here, if your answer just shows up once and we're ready to graph, what you'll see is that the shape will just cross through the x-axis. If it shows up an even amount of times, then when I get to that solution, it's actually going to bounce off the x-axis. And if it shows up an odd amount of times, then we're going to call it a wiggle. And I realize once 1 is an odd number, and these are both crossing, but this is crossing cleanly through, and the other one's kind of going to do this little wiggle through. All right? So going back to my graph, if I just put those important points, and I'm only going to put the x-intercepts on this one because that's all I really need to focus on, is this is -∞, -∞. This one is infinity, negative infinity. And then this point, if I went to Desmos, you're going to see, if I just tap on the graph, remember that this is negative 4, 0, negative 2, 0, and whoa, there we go, 1, 0. So I'm going to write that down on my paper now. Okay, so here's negative 4, 0, here is negative 2, 0, and here is 1, 0. And again, what I want you to point out is that this is a wiggle through the x-axis, this is crossing through the x-axis, and this is bouncing off the x-axis. And I know if it's going to bounce, wiggle, or cross based on how many times the answer shows up. So let's talk about this overall shape before we go on to the next one. So how could I possibly know that this was going to be an upside down U? Because this is in factored form, and I really need to see it in standard form to know that. So what I could do is realize, if I break this all up, that if I just see how many x's there are all together, then that would have been the highest exponent in my standard form. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 x's. So this one would have actually started out with the negative 2, and then x to the 6, and then I would have had a bunch of other stuff behind it, right? And remember, an even power means it's a u, and the fact that it's a negative would flip that u, so I'd have a bumpy u upside down. And I don't really want to write this every time, so I could realize that there's 3 x's here, 1 x here, and 2 more x's here, and that would give me my 6 x's. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to Desmos, and I'm going to put this in here. And before I even do that, I'm going to know what the shape is. So here I have 2 x's, there's a third x, and there's a fourth x. And there's nothing in front, like there was here, that says it's going to flip. So I know that the leading term would be an x to the 4th power, so I can already guess that this is going to be some type of bumpy u. So I'm going to switch to Desmos, and I'm going to type this in. All right, so I'm at Desmos, and you can do this too. You can follow along. So let's see. It's x squared. And then I'm going to have, in parentheses, x plus 2. And then in parentheses, x minus 3. And then I do want to go over and notice to the wrench and put in my x's. So it does ask from negative 4 to 4. And then I'm just going to start with that standard window of y's, which would be negative 10 to 10, and just see if that's all I need. And it's pretty close. I would like to see a little bit further down, so I'm going to go back to my wrench and maybe just put in negative 50, and that's great. I didn't even need to do negative 50. So if you notice, it crosses at, let's tap on here, negative 2, 0, and 3. And again, this is what we would call cross. This would be bouncing off the x-axis, and this would be crossing off the x-axis. So I'm going to go to my notes, and I'm just going to copy this picture down. So I actually need to keep this up a little bit. So let me do that. And I'm just drawing this. So all right, now you can see my artwork. This isn't very good. This would actually be just a little bit lower. But since this is in factored form, and I were going to solve, I would set this factor equal to 0. Again, this factor equal to 0, which I realized I didn't do that on the first example. And I would take this factor and set it equal to 0. And then I get x is 3. It shows up once. And when it shows up once, I know it's just going to cross through the x-axis. And here is that 3. And then this one, I get x equals negative 2. And again, because it shows up once, I know when I graph it, it's going to cross at negative 2. So hold on, I think I drew my picture wrong. Just a sec.